I walked up to the table and stood there. My wife's jaw dropped and her mouth was an open, gaping hole. I think it was the most unattractive I had ever seen her look. Douglas started to rise, but I held up my hand and said no. Douglas, don't get up. As long as you were sitting, you were safe, but if you get up, I will be forced to knock your teeth down your throat, so please remain seated. I would hate to make a horrible scene here. I am sorry that I am interrupting your intimate moment here, but I have to tell you, Julia, I cannot believe that you faked being sick, so you could blow off a weekend with me and be with this piece of dog. You know, there is no one in the world I hate more than Douglas' dog Simon, but to come here to our special place, the place where we met, the place where I asked you to be my wife, and the place where we had so many happy times, that is really something else again. Yes, it used to be a very special place to me, but it is not so special to me anymore, and neither are you on our wedding day. You promised I will never do anything to hurt you, and I will never do anything to make you stop loving me. As I see it, that is two broken promises, because when I am terribly hurt, and two, my love for you is melting away like an ice cube in a cup of hot coffee, you know me better than anyone, Julia, and you know how I operate. I see the situation, analyze the situation, identify what the problem is, and look for the solution. I see the situation as you hear with Douglas, and analyzing it, I conclude you want to date other men. I am your husband, and I will not allow you to date other men. So I am obviously the problem. My solution is to remove the problem, so that is what I'm going to do. You are now free to date any men you want. I hope this piece of dog is worth a Julia. As I turned to leave, I added, Douglas, this isn't over between us. However, I will be seeing you around. I walked quickly to the exit and out onto the street. I hurried across Michigan Avenue and around the corner toward the lobby of the Drake Hotel. I stood there out of view when I saw Julia rush out the door and onto the sidewalk in front of Spaga. She desperately looked everywhere, trying to locate me, but she didn't spot me when she didn't see me anywhere. Her shoulders slumped and she crossed the street, hailed a taxi, and headed north toward our condo a few blocks away. I was horribly upset, but I took some consolation in knowing that I had at least ruined her night with Douglas, and also that she seemed to care enough to leave him and head home, hoping to find me there. She wouldn't. I waited a few more minutes to see what Dog did. It wasn't long before he came out and hailed a taxi and left in the opposite direction. I decided to stay at the Drake for a few days until I could figure out what to do with my life, so I went in and was able to get a room. You were probably wondering how we got to this point in time, so I will lay it all out for you. My name is John Burton, and of course my wife's name is Julia. When I graduated from MIT, I took a job as a software engineer working for Grace Systems Solutions, a software developer in Chicago, the owner of the company, and my boss was Greg Grace, and I have to say he was a pretty decent boss. I was able to work my way up in the company quite quickly, and was actually pretty successful at what I did at the second company Christmas party I attended. Greg introduced me to his goddaughter, Julia. She was the daughter of his best friend, and he had invited them to the party. I actually think he invited them so he could set me up with Julia. I was glad he did. Have you ever heard of love at first sight? Well, I was hit with it. I thought Julia was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen, and she was witty, funny, and everything else I could imagine I would want in a woman. Yeah, you can tell I was a smitten. It didn't take long for me to dominate her night, and truthfully, I think she dominated mine too. We hit it off from the start and never looked back. As you read earlier, the party was at Spaga, and it just kind of became our special place 3 months later. While on a Saturday evening date at Spaga, I asked her to marry me, and she jumped into my arms and said yes. We were married, and our lives just kept getting better and better. My career flourished, her career flourished, and we had many celebratory dinners at our place. We were married in 2010, and everything seemed to be going along great until about 6 months ago when I started to get the feeling that the honeymoon was over. I know it isn't supposed to last forever, but I really wanted it to. I was almost certain that there wasn't anything going on behind my back. But of course, you could never be absolutely certain. It was just a feeling that the romance had diminished. I decided to do something about it and began planning a surprise getaway for the two of us. One of my best friends and former roommate, Adam, hardly worked with his father, Ben, in the software industry too, and in fact was a customer of Greg's company. I frequently had to make a trip to their offices in Cleveland, so I made my plans coinciding with one of the scheduled trips. Julia and I were supposed to go to Cleveland to meet with Adam and Ben and their wives, Carolyn and Gloria, respectively, for dinner on Friday night. then a brief meeting Saturday morning to discuss business, and then we were going to drive to Niagara Falls for a couple of days by ourselves, returning to Chicago on Monday night. My hope was that we would reconnect. Julia clearly gave off vibes that she didn't want to make the trip with me. She didn't know about the Niagara Falls aspect because I wanted it to be a romantic surprise to jumpstart our second honeymoon, but she kept bulking at the idea, and I had to push a bit to get her to agree to go. Friday morning rolled around, and when I got up, Julia wasn't in our bed. I looked for her and found her in our spare bedroom sleeping. I whispered, "Julia, are you awake?" She stirred slightly and responded, "John, I got sick in the night and slipped out of bed so I wouldn't disturb you. I am really sick and just need to sleep some more. Will you call my office and tell them that I am sick and won't be in at all today?" Please, I did as she asked and left her to sleep while I went at work around 10 o'clock. I called her to see how she was feeling, and she said she was still sick. I said, well, I guess I will have to go to Cleveland alone. Then I didn't get a response to that, so I hung up the phone and immediately dialed Adam to let him know that I would be coming alone and see if they wanted to change any of the plans Adam suggested, that since Julia couldn't make it, perhaps they would cancel the Cleveland trip and the two couples would just come to Chicago to meet with me Friday night, and then Saturday they could do some shopping on the Magnificent Mile, and if Julia was feeling better, then we could have dinner Saturday night. I thought it was a wonderful idea, so I told him that I would make reservations for them at the Drake Hotel and would meet them across the street at Spaga for dinner at 6 p.m. I called and canceled my flight, my hotel room in Cleveland, and all of the arrangements I had made for a car and for the hotel in Niagara Falls. I was disappointed. But what are you going to do at 3? In the afternoon, I called Julia to see if she was feeling better and well enough that maybe she would join us for dinner. But I got a busy signal, and frankly, I forgot to call again because I was busy getting my presentation set up for Adam and Ben finally at 5:30 p.m. as I was rushing out the door. I called again, but this time there was no answer, and it went a voicemail. I left her a message telling her what the plans were and took a taxi to Spaga to meet with the Hartley. We were having a cocktail at our table before our meal when all of a sudden Adam got a funny look on his face and said, "John, I am sorry, but this is going to upset you a great deal." Julia just walked into the restaurant and joined another man, they behind you, and to your left against the wall. I'm so sorry, John. I slowly turned in my chair so I could see her, and there she was with another man. I used that term loosely because it wasn't really a man, it was Douglas Dog Simon. I hate him and always will, to make that long story short. I will simply tell you that he was engaged to my sister Barbara and literally left her standing at the altar. He finally showed up 2 days later at her door to tell her he just didn't want to get married. 3 weeks later, we saw his marriage license to another woman in the paper and a birth announcement. 5 months. After that, Marb was crushed, and even though I feel she is better off without the cheating AOLA, she has never quite gotten over the whole thing. So now you know why I call him and why I hate him anyway. Back to the present, to say I was shocked would be a gross understatement. I know I tried to say a few words, but just stammered. I could see the shocked looks on everyone's faces, and knew they felt sympathy for me when I could finally speak. I said, well, isn't that something? Obviously, I am not going to be able to continue this evening with you. I'm not going to just sit here and pretend I didn't see what we all have seen. I suggest you continue your evening, and why don't we meet for breakfast tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. in your hotel coffee shop? I'm quite certain I will be in better shape by then. Also, it is obvious that IA and I will not be meeting you for dinner tomorrow night. I am really sorry, please forgive me. I hugged the ladies, and both men too. They were, after all, longtime friends, and walked over to the table where my wife was sitting. I am pretty sure that Adam followed a few steps behind just to make sure that everything would be all right. It wouldn't be, but I appreciated his concern for me, so we are back to the confrontation at their table and so forth, and I am in my room at the Drake. I had turned off my cell phone while I was registering and figured I better turn it back on. There were several messages from Julia, but like everyone else in my situation, I just deleted them without listening to them. As I deleted the last voicemail, my phone rang again, but I let it go to voicemail because I didn't want to hear a thing she had to say. When it beeped that there was a voicemail, I just deleted it and turned off the phone again. Saturday morning, I met with Adam and Ben to talk about our business relationship. I said, well, guys, I think there are going to be some significant changes taking place in my life, and I'm not exactly sure what those are going to be. I would like to ask you to not sign the new contract Greg sent to you. Can you give me a little time to see what shakes out with my marriage and my job as... You know, Greg is Julia's father's best friend and her godfather if you can. There may be a better deal for you out there later. If not, I certainly understand. But honestly, I don't see any harm in you going month to month with Greg until my future is solidified. What do you think as one?" They replied, "John, we will do as you asking. We are with Greg because of you. And if your situation changes, we will always be with you. Let us know what we have to do, and when things change, we are here for you in any way you want us to be." I got tears in my eyes with that, and again just hugged the two of them. Then the ladies walked into the restaurant, and it was time for them to drag their husbands off to spend their money. Adam's wife, Carolyn, smiled and said, "Come on, dear, your credit card is cold, and I think I need to warm it up for you." Gloria, Ben's wife, said, "I hope that Ben's cards are heat-resistant because we are going to slide them so many times today that they just might melt." It isn't often we get a chance to shop the Magnificent Mile. I had to chuckle in spite of how I was feeling because I know they were playing with their husbands and also trying to cheer me up. I loved them for it. Hugs all around, and off they went. I thought about going to the office to put some things in order, but figured that Greg might be there on a Saturday, and maybe even Julia would go there, expecting I might turn up there. I decided to stay away and go in on Sunday morning early to do what I figured I would need to do. I spent the rest of Saturday afternoon reading a book I picked up the next morning. I went into the office and put a few things in order. I worked out the plan for what I would try to accomplish on Monday morning. Then I went back to my hotel room with the Chicago Tribune and started looking at the advertisements for apartments. I knew that I couldn't stay at the Drake for the long term, so I would have to do something else. When I had a few possibilities, I made some calls and set up appointments for Tuesday morning. When that was all set up, I settled down and decided to watch some football. Monday morning, I went to see my attorney. Roger had been my attorney since I arrived in Chicago, and I asked him if he would have a problem representing me in a divorce action. He said, "God, no, John. You can't really expect me to believe you are divorcing Julia. You love her like nobody I have ever seen." I replied, "Roger, the key word here is love. It is now past tense because I don't love her anymore if you don't want to represent me. Fine, but all I would ask then is that you don't represent Julia either." He agreed I would rather not represent either of you. "I think you should try to work this out, John, but if you won't or can't, then you should use Jacob Easterman. I think he will do a good job for you, but please try to work it out." Okay, I thanked him for the referral, but said, "No way are we going to work it out, Roger. I just don't love her anymore." I met with Jacob, and he assured me that he could have all of the paperwork ready to file by the end of the day on Tuesday, and Julia would be served Wednesday morning. A visit to my bank was the next order of business, and I got a cashier's check for half of our savings account. I left all of the money in our checking account because there would be bills to be paid. Up until the time our divorce was final, Julia and I had a specific arrangement. When it came to our finances, we each contributed a set amount each month to cover the monthly operating expenses. We also put in a set amount for meals and entertainment and a certain amount to build a fund for furnishings and equipment, etc. That account had grown to a sizable amount because we always put in more than we used. That is why I left it, so it could pay bills until the divorce was final. We also each put about $500 per month into a savings account for vacations and holidays. I did take the 50% of that account. All of the rest of our individual earnings were our money to invest as we saw fit and use as we saw fit. My investment account and her investment account were completely separate, and in fact, with different brokers, I don't even know the value of her account. And I suspect she doesn't know the value of mine. Likewise, on our 401k plans. We each had those separately. The only thing we know about the other person's finances is that an amount deposited each month into checking and savings. I took my cashier's check to a different bank locally and opened new accounts for me. The amount I deposited in checking was $25,000 and $125,000 in my new savings account. I took care of a few additional details, mainly financial like insurances, etc., then figured it was time to go into the office and get things settled there. I had barely walked in the door when the receptionist, told me, "Greg wants to see you in his office immediately." I figured, well, here we go. When I knocked on his door, he called me in. "Come in, John," and closed the door. I got a call from Julia. What in the hell is going on? I told him the whole story, and he asked, "What are you going to do now?" To which I replied, "I'm going to divorce her. What do you think now? I really like Greg, but he is a bit of an arrogant sometimes." And it started to come out immediately. He said, "Oh no, you aren't John. You're going to suck it up and work this out with your wife. There's no way you're going to divorce her and continue working here. Those are your choices. Work it out with Julia or I fire you." I looked stunned. Really, I was pretending to look stunned and said, "Greg, are you telling me that my work isn't valuable enough for you to get around the fact that I am divorcing Julia? Haven't I done a good job for you? Have I broken any of the company rules? Or did I not follow company policy? You may have guessed it by now that I had my phone recording this whole conversation. John, you do a great job for the company, and you are as straight-laced as it gets and always follow the rules, and hell, you helped write the company policy. So I know you follow that, but Julia is my goddaughter, and I'm telling you that unless you work it out with her, I am firing you. Do you understand? I know he was just trying to pressure me, but I was going to turn the tables and put the pressure on him. I didn't smile, but I wanted to at that point. Instead, I said in a sad voice, with a sad face then, "Greg, you are going to have to say the words because I am divorcing Julia." He looked surprised and disappointed, but he said, "John, you were fired." I asked him to have security ES me to my office so I could remove the few things that I had left there. I did take a few things out on Sunday because I suspected that this was going to happen. I had worked with Greg a long time and knew him quite well when I got to my office. Or should I say former office. There were only a few things I wanted, so I packed them in a small box I had gotten from the storage room. As I was about to leave the office, Greg said to me, "John, what about this picture?" It was a picture of Julia and I on our wedding day. She was beautiful in her wedding gown, and I have to admit I didn't look too shabby in my tuxedo either. A sadness overtook me for a moment, and I know that tears wet up in my eyes. I said, "Oh yes, I always did love that frame." I picked up the picture, took off the back, dropped the picture into the trash bin, and put the frame in my box of belongings. When I turned to walk out the door, there stood Julia. She looked shocked, and there were tears streaming down her face. Obviously, she had seen me discard the wedding picture and felt the ramifications of me doing that. She asked, in a very subdued voice, "Johnny, can we talk?" I only slowed down and halted my exit slightly to respond. "There is nothing to talk about, Julia. You already have cheated on me, or you broke both promises you made to me on our wedding day. You hurt me so bad it broke my heart, and you did something that made me stop loving you. It has been said many times before, you can't unbreak a heart. What is left? Do you really think I will be able to get over you cheating on me? You know how much I hate Douglas after what he did to Barb, but you were cheating on me with him? Surely you can't expect that we can still make it as husband and wife. No, Julia, there is nothing else to talk about." I continued walking out the door of my job and out the door of Julia's life. I called Adam Harley and told him that Julia and I were divorcing and that I had been fired from Grace System Solutions because of it. I told him that I was working on a new system security program that would be head and shoulders above what Grace was now offering, but that I needed a couple of months to get it in condition to implement it. I asked again, would you be willing to stay on month to month with Grace until I could roll out my new program? For the last 2 years, Greg has not allowed me to program as part of my job, preferring to have me do system maintenance projects and all customer service SL relations issues. Because of that, I have been writing code in my personal time, and I have it almost finished. Had I not gotten fired, I was going to lease it to Greg after he had a chance to see the improvements over his current program, but now I will be free to market it on my own. Adam said I would have to check with Dad before my answer could be final, but I'm quite certain we would be willing to give you a few months to finalize it. And then, based upon our evaluation, of course, we could implement it here. I was able to move out of the hotel in 4 days into a very nice apartment. And though the monthly rent was rather high, I had the reserves to make it work for a few months. After the move, I spent 10 to 12 hours a day writing and testing code. I knew that I could have it ready for market soon, but I was driven to finish it and move on with my life. During the time Julia was served divorce papers, she called me numerous times wanting to talk it through. I listened to all of her voice messages, but there was nothing that I felt the necessity to talk to her about. She told me, "Johnny, I admit I probably would have slept with Douglas if you hadn't stepped in, but I never did. I don't know what I was thinking, but I love you. Will you please call me?" She said, "Johnny, I love you. I don't want a divorce. Please call me." She said, "Johnny, can't you find a way to forgive me and stay married to me?" She said, "Johnny, I miss you. I was sick of it." So I called Jacob and asked him to please contact Julia's attorney and tell him I would be seeking a restraining order if she didn't stop soon. Thereafter, I got a message from Julia, "Johnny, I love you and want with all my heart to put an end to this and spend the rest of my life loving you. I can't believe you want a restraining order against me, but if you need to do it, go ahead. This will be my last message to you. I want you more than life itself. But the ball is now in your court. I am sorry I hurt you so bad that you wouldn't even talk to me. I love you, honey. Call me anytime you want. True to her word. I got not further voicemails or texts or anything. The effect wasn't quite what I expected because it kind of put a final stroke to our marriage, even if we weren't divorced yet. It really did make me sad. 3 weeks flew by as I was working on my programs for many hours in each day. On a Friday afternoon, shortly after lunchtime, I got a call from Jacob informing me that we had a court hearing scheduled for the following Wednesday morning with Judge Janice Caldwell. He said that was not good news because she had the reputation of being totally against divorce and put everyone through the hoops before ever granting one, if she granted it at all. When we arrived at the courtroom, Julia and her attorney were already there, and our case was called within a couple of minutes. Once seated, the BFF called the courtroom to order all rise, and we did. Judge Caldwell entered and sat down and welcomed us to her courtroom. She turned to me and asked, "As the petitioner in this divorce case, I am asking if you would drop this action and go home and work on your marriage." I replied that, "No, Your Honor, I want to continue the action." I knew that trouble was probably coming when she had a look of disapproval on her face, but said, "Well, okay, then." She turned to Julia and asked Mrs. Burton, "Are you in agreement with this divorce action, or do you want to work on saving your marriage?" Julia didn't hesitate, "Your Honor. I absolutely do not want a divorce. I love my husband and I want nothing more than to save my marriage." Mr. Burton, I have reviewed the petition carefully, recognizing that you were filing on the basis of irreconcilable differences, and I note that your proposed Oz settlement is extremely fair, and I see no indication of the usual vindictiveness from the normal petitioner. Do you have any explanation why that is, Your Honor? I don't hate her. I don't want to hurt her, and I have no reason to not be fair in a settlement. I just don't want to be married to her anymore because I don't love her anymore. Julia gasped when I said that, and there was a hint of a SB. The judge continued, "I think there is a really good chance that you two can work out your issues. Given the proper opportunity, I'm going to order marriage counseling with a very qualified counselor. I am going to order 3 joint sessions, 1 initially, then 3 individual sessions for each of you, and then 2 additional joint sessions. The only exception to this ruling is if the counselor informs that court that there is no hope of saving this marriage, so ordered." She struck her gavel bam and called, "Next case." I wanted to protest, but Jacob held my arm and said, "John, just go to the first session and see if you change your mind. If not, make it perfectly clear to the counselor that you want out and see where it goes from there." Counseling was a disaster. Julia cried, apologized, and begged for me to stop the divorce and work out our marriage. The counselor listened to me but didn't seem too sympathetic to my desire to end the marriage. He asked John, "Why don't you tell me why you won't consider working on your marriage?" "Dr. Graham, let me tell you a story, not fiction, but it would read like a fairy tale to many. I was attended my company Christmas party and saw a girl across the room. Ever hear of love at first sight? It was love at first sight. For me, my boss introduced me to his goddaughter Julia, and I knew she was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I glanced over at Julia, and she was smiling, not the sad and tearful woman of a few moments ago. She was perfect for me, and apparently I was perfect for her, because it wasn't long before we were hotly involved, and 3 months later I asked her to marry me, and after that we didn't look back. I thought we were perfect this time. It was me that let out a small sigh. It was close to a SB, but it didn't quite get there. I went on, it was love at first sight. Mr. Graham, I didn't grow into it. It wasn't something that happened over time. It was instantaneous love at first sight. Does that give you any hints as to my psychological makeup? I would think it would. So if one can fall in love at first sight, it wouldn't be much of a stretch to have one fall out of love in an instant with it. Julia was on a date with another man. She claimed she never had sex with him, and I actually believe her. But there is a very good chance she would have had sex with him if I hadn't stepped in. She cheated on our marriage. Any way you want to look at it, a date with another man is cheating, and to add insult to injury. The man she was with was Douglas Dog Simon, my worst enemy. It wasn't just any man she knew of my hatred of Douglas. She knew the whole story about how Douglas hurt my sister Barbara. Yet here was the man she chose to do her cheating with at further insult to injury. She went with him to the most special place in our relationship, the place we met, the place where I asked her to marry me. the place where we spent many happy times together, and the place where I hoped we would celebrate her first pregnancy if that happened, the place where we would have celebrated the birth of our first child, and so on and so on. When I saw her sit down with Douglas, saw him touch her face, saw them raise their glasses to each other in a toast, and saw the smile on her face, the love of my life cheating on me with my worst enemy. My heart tore open, and that love I had started leaking out by the time I got to their table. My heart was half empty, and by the time I walked out the door of the restaurant, it was dead. No more love for this woman who had been my life. All the love had leaked out. So now you see, Doc, why I don't want to be married to her anymore. There is no love left, and I don't want to be in a marriage when I don't love her. I cannot be any more plain than that, can I? Julia was openly crying by this time, and I felt bad for her, but it didn't change my resolve. I didn't love her anymore, and I wanted out of the marriage. I turned to her and said, "Julia, I am sorry. I don't want to hurt you, but can't you see my point? You wouldn't want to be married to me if I don't love you, and I don't." Dr. Graham said, "Well, our time is up for today, but I think we have gotten everything out on the table at this time, and I feel confident that we can make some further strides with the individual counseling, and I have high hopes that we will be able to reconnect you too. I'm going to recommend to the judge that these sessions should continue." About this time, I was livid. After everything I just told you, there is no chance in hell that I am attending further counseling sessions. You must be ignorant if you still feel there is a chance for this marriage to survive. Have your counseling sessions with Julia if you must, but I will not be attending any more sessions. I got up and walked out of the office. I thought, damn, how can anyone be so dense 2 days late? I got a letter from the court with 3 dates scheduled for my individual counseling sessions. Needless to say, when the first date had come and gone without me attending, I was escorted to the courthouse and put before the judge, and ultimately held in contempt of Court Judge Caldwell, fined me $500, and informed me that if I missed my next counseling session, I would be jailed. I told her, "You will have to jail me then because I'm not going to any more counseling sessions." That is exactly what happened. I skipped the next session. In 2 hours after my scheduled appointment, a police officer knocked on my door and escorted me to the Cook County Jail. What? A lovely place, that is. Yikes! My attorney visited me each day and tried to get me to agree to go to the counseling, but I refused. On the 3rd day, I had another visitor. My old boss, Greg, had come to see me and was allowed a 15-minute visit. He said, "John, I am sorry you were going through this, and I am sorry with the way I treated you. I should have seen how things were with you and been more supportive. I think I have a way out of this whole thing for you, if you will just give me a chance to work through it with you. If you agree to the individual counseling, Judge Caldwell will let you out of jail. Then you and I can sit down and go over what I feel will be helpful in resolving your situation. All I ask is that you consider coming back to work for me afterwards. No promise is necessary, but just consider it for the first time in quite a while." I actually felt good about something. Greg had always been my friend and had always been fair to me before the Julia thing blew up. I agreed to do as he asked, and promised to think about going back to work for GRCE System Solutions. The judge scheduled my first individual session for the next day, and I was escorted home by an officer who waited while I showered, shaved, and dressed for my appointment. He then escorted me to the session and waited for it to be completed. The session was what you would expect with all the psychological digging and probing. You know how it is. I did everything I could to be as cooperative as possible. When the session was over, Dr. Graham escorted me out and informed the officer Mr. Burton was very cooperative and has agreed to attend the next session a week from today. The officer said, "Very well. Then, Mr. Burton, you were free to go home, but let me caution you that if you miss next week's session, you will be taken before Judge Caldwell again. And man, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes then. She is one tough, mean woman when she gets pissed. So my advice is to not skip that session." I called Greg and agreed to meet with him at my apartment the next day. He and I spent the whole morning talking through his proposed plan. We made all of the necessary arrangements to obtain what we wanted and then went to lunch. After lunch, we sat down again to discuss my future involvement with Gray System Solutions. I said, "Greg, I have always thought well of you and you have been a good friend, but I need to do what is best for me. I don't know if you remember, back when I got my last promotion, you ordered me to not do any programming. You informed me that I was too valuable as a system maintenance manager and customer service relations manager to get up to my elbows in programming. I love to write code, though." Greg, so I have been working on a new security program that is 4 generations above anything on the market today. Trust me when I tell you that it would blow your socks off and revolutionize the system security of this country. You know all the trouble retailers have been having with being hacked with my new program. That will be totally impossible, totally. I'm a couple of months away from testing on real company data, and I would guess the program would be ready to roll out in 3 or 4 months. Greg nodded. You have been and Adam lined up for the test, right? I smiled and said, Greg, I never could pull much while over your eyes, yes. They have agreed to give it a trial. You know, they are with you because of my personal friendship with Adam. And truthfully, if my program is successful, they would be leaving you. Greg said, I know you were right, but how did you intend to get around the non-compete clause in your contract? Greg, the non-compete clause only applied if I quit or was fired for CA. Neither of those is the case, though. You fired me because I wouldn't try to work out my marriage because of that. There is no non-compete clause issue. He got a devious smile on his face and said, not to be contentious because I want you to come back to work for me, but I could have always trumped up some work-related issues to fall back on. I laughed at him, and he kind of got a pissed-off look on his face that I would laugh at him. Greg, I said I recorded our conversation when you fired me, and I clearly asked you if there were any work issues responsible for my firing, and you said no. My firing had everything to do with Julia and nothing to do with my work. I have you on tape. Why did you feel it necessary to tape that conversation, John? Because, Greg, I know you. I know how much you love Julia, and I was pretty certain that you would go all out to get me to not divorce her. Okay, fair enough. So I continued, I expect to make a fortune on new software, and I am willing to share that good fortune with you, Greg. Under certain circumstances, I will come back to work for you full-time. My duties can remain the same with regard to customer service relations, but I will not go back to the system maintenance aspects. You will have to hire a manager to take that over, and that manager should report to me because it is going to be so closely aligned to the new program, assuming you get on board with it, and I have every reason to believe you will be ecstatic with it. The remainder of my time, say about 40%, will be spent on program development, even though I will be working full-time for you and getting paid to develop my program and future programs. The exclusive ownership of said programs will rest with me. In exchange for those conditions, I will grant you an exclusive license to market my programs with a fixed royalty percentage payable to me. I know this is pretty brassy of me, Greg, but after you see what I'm working on, you will be happy with this deal. We are going to make it. Killing Greg, a true businessman, said, I agree to all the terms of this proposal and will have our corporate attorney contact you to write up the deal. You understand, though, that if I feel it isn't working as expected, I would still have the option of letting you go. I would like you to modify the royalty percentage to a reasonable higher number in the event that would happen. My next scheduled counseling session came and went without me attending. Trudy is warning the officer knocked on my door and dragged me to the courthouse, this time in cuffs. He smirked. I warned you, buddy. This time your bum is grass. When Judge Caldwell came into the courtroom, I detected 2 or 3 shades of bright red in her face, and smoke coming out of her nostrils, and fire shooting out of her eyes. Yeah, as predicted, she was pissed. Well, Mr. Burton, it seems you have done it again. I find you in contempt of court and hereby sentence you to 30 days in jail. Julia was present, though I don't know why, and with an outburst said, No, Your Honor. Please don't do that to John. I withdraw my objections to his request for divorce. Please grant it and don't send him to jail again. I think spit flew out of her mouth when Judge Caldwell said it's too late for that, honey. He is spending time in jail, period. At that time, I jumped up and yelled, Your Honor, I would like to approach the bench. She glared at me and spat again. You are not allowed to address me directly. That is what you have an attorney for. I turned to Jacob and said, Jacob Easterman, you are fired. Now, Your Honor. I will be representing myself and wish to approach the bench I approached, and so did Julia's attorney. What is it, Mr. Burton? Your Honor, I would like to request a short meeting in your chambers to put this whole case to rest. I believe if we have that meeting, everything will be resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Very well, counselors will meet with me in my chambers in 10 minutes. I declare a short recess. Again, the gavel bam. When we gathered in her office, I requested that the meeting be off the record. She shook her head and was about to speak when I said, Your Honor, I have reason to believe that there are issues that neither you or Julia's attorney would like on public record, so I once again asked that it be off the record. She looked at me long and hard and then nodded and asked the court recorder to leave the room very well. "Mr. Burton, it is your show, let'n hear it. First of all, Your Honor, I have no desire for anyone to get hurt further in these proceedings. Please believe me. I have reason to believe that there has been judicial impropriety here. I don't want you hurt. I don't want your marriage destroyed. I don't want Julia's parents' marriage destroyed either, and I certainly don't want Julia hurt. I don't love her anymore, and I don't want to be married to her anymore. But I don't want her world to fall apart either. As you might have already surmised, I have evidence of you having an affair with Julia's father that would dictate that you recuse yourself from this case. The evidence is irrefutable and rather explicit. I might add, I would present that evidence here to you and opposing counsel if necessary, but I don't want to do that further, forced to do so. I would provide it for the Judicial Review Board, but I don't want to do that either. As I said, I don't want anyone hurt further. Julia would be devastated, and I don't know if your two marriages would survive. I just don't want to hurt anyone. I just want my divorce." I looked over at Julia's attorney to see if he would acknowledge his thoughts on the matter. "What do you think I asked?" He looked at Judge Caldwell and said, "Your Honor, I have always respected you because you refused to give up on marriages that had a chance to survive. You have been a real hard-ass in some cases. Excuse my bluntness, but I have always seen why you did it. Assuming that Mr. Burton's evidence indeed exists, I would be disappointed in you having an affair, and further disappointed that you would not have recused yourself from this case, but, like him, I wouldn't want you hurt. I believe you should grant him his divorce," turning to me. He said, "Mr. Burton, my only request of you is that you just sit down with Julia for a short time and let her talk to you. You told the counselor that your heart was broken, and I understand that, but know also that her heart is broken too. Just give her a few minutes of your time, Your Honor, none, if this needs to leave this room." If you grant the divorce when we return to the courtroom, she granted the divorce and agreed that the property settlement as presented was ordered. We each kept our investment accounts, our 401ks, and 50% of our savings. It was agreed that the operating expense account was sufficient to pay all of the bills up through the finalization of the divorce and beyond, and would remain in Julia's custody. It was agreed that she would receive the condo and could live there as long as she chose to totally free. But should she sell it, the net proceeds would be split 50-50 these. The judge reversed her ruling of 30 days in jail and only assessed a fine of $500 again, which I gladly paid. I realized that she had to save face in some fashion, or there would be unusual scrutiny of the case, and nobody wanted that as promised. I sat down with Julia in a private interview room next to the courtroom. She apologized again and told me she had no idea why she did what she did. She told me that she was going to continue to see your counselor until she understood why she told me that she would always love me and begged me to forgive her. I do forgive you, Julia, and I do not hate you. I just don't love you anymore." I hugged her and walked out of the room. I could hear her crying as I walked down the hallway. I spent the next 6 weeks working on the new security program and was on the verge of implementing it on Adam and Ben's system. About a week before I was to go to Cleveland, I got a call from Julia. She said, "Johnny, I have decided to sell the condo, and I have an offer for $560,000. I didn't want to sell it to someone else before I gave you the opportunity to buy it if you wanted. If you want it, you can pay me the $280,000, and I will reject the other offer. What do you think, first of all?" I said, "I do not want the condo. You can go ahead and sell it and have my share of the proceeds sent to my attorney payable to me. He will take care of any of the paperwork that needs to be handled for the sale and get the funds into my account." "But secondly, why are you selling the condo?" she responded. "I am selling it because I am leaving town. I have a new job and won't be living here anymore." She went on to tell me that she had found out about her father and the judge and that she knew I hadn't want anyone hurt. But it still did hurt her when she found out. She said she just needed a fresh start. I wished her all the luck in her new job and said my goodbyes. 2 weeks later, I walked into Adam and Greg's company with my security software package prepared for the testing phase and implementation of the live system. When Adam came to greet me, he gave me a big hug and said that they were very excited about the new system and anxious to get started. "John," he said, "let me introduce you to our IT administrator," and there stood Julia. I glanced to Adam and said, "What is this all about?" He smiled and said, "Julia is our new IT administrator. I am sure you know how talented she is, and I am sure you will have no problem working with her to implement the new security package." I was a bit nonplussed, but I told him I will need a computer workstation to work on a few things for the remainder of the day. I will work some with Julia today, but mostly I will be getting the package ready for installing and implementation. The computer should have internet accessibility. I managed to settle myself down, and I have to tell you that the day was rather pleasant. I had always looked at Julia as witty, intelligent, humorous, beautiful, and fun to be with. None of those attributes had changed. Like I said, it was pleasant. I also had always considered Julia to be my best friend as well as my wife and lover, so we got along wonderfully. Throughout the day, it was quite obvious that Julia was doing everything in her power to be close to me, to interact with me, and yes, to subtly touch me. It was having an effect. Like I said, I always considered Julia my best friend, and truthfully, I missed her at 5:30 p.m. We said our goodbyes with "I will see you tomorrow" and left sitting in my hotel room. I did a lot of thinking and decided to make a bold move. I logged onto my laptop and hacked into the company computer system. Yes, you know, us programmers almost always put a back door into our systems just in case we ever want to access it. Anyway, I hacked into the personnel records and got Julia's address. I went to the wine store and bought a bottle of Julia's favorite wine and drove to her apartment. The doorman asked whom I wanted to see and asked if she was expecting me. I informed him I am here to see Julia Burton, and no, she is not expecting me. He called Julia's apartment and got no response. I figured that maybe she had gone out to dinner and wasn't back yet, so I asked if it would be all right for me to wait for a while. He told me that it would be okay for me to wait and directed me to a small lounge area off to the side of the lobby. It wasn't too long before I saw Julia walk through the door with a man in tow. As they reached the elevator, the man gave her a hug and a kiss and patted her on the bum. Just then, the doorman man came to his senses and walked over to them and said something to Julia and pointed over in my direction. I started walking in their direction, and I heard Julia say, "Oh God, no, oh please, no, 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 well here we are again. It seems I'm always interrupting your dates." "Julia," I said, "I apologize. I had no right to show up here uninvited, but obviously I am glad I did." I handed the bottle of wine to the man and said, "You two have an enjoyable evening," as I walked out the door. Julia was rushing after me, begging, "Johnny, please don't go. Please don't leave me again," but I did. I went back to my hotel and sent Julia an email at the company. "Julia, when I walked into Adam's offices, I was surprised to see you there. I guess it didn't take me too long to realize that you had probably quit your job, sold the condo, moved to Cleveland, and went to work for Ben and Adam, so you would have the opportunity to be close to me. I might be an arrogant person, but I assumed you wanted a chance to get close to me, hoping that we might reconnect and get back together." I added, "I imagine Greg had a lot to do with that, telling you what I was working on and where I would be. That doesn't surprise me, really, but it doesn't make me too happy to have it messing with my life anyway. I was actually quite happy to see you. Truth be told, I have missed you. We were, after all, great friends. I enjoyed being with you today. It felt really good. I didn't want it to end, so I decided to bring over a bottle of wine so we could talk some more away from the office. I had to take a break to refocus my thoughts. Then I continued, "Imagine my surprise at seeing you with another man. It kind of confuses me. I guess you go to all the trouble to be close to me again, but in the short time you have been in Cleveland, you already have an intimate relationship with another man. There are only two things I can think of that would explain that action. You aren't really interested in renewing our relationship. Or you still have it in your head that you could be with me and date other men. Well, either way, I am out of the equation. I honestly had been second-guessing myself for divorcing you, but your actions give me peace of mind, and knowing I didn't make a mistake, what makes me angry at myself is the knowledge that I almost was a fool, again believing that you cared about me. You don't. You care only about yourself. I hope one day you find what will satisfy you, what will make you happy. The only remaining thing I want to say is don't pursue me in any way again. As far as you were concerned, I shouldn't exist. Have a good life. Julia." Then I sent her a second email relative to the software installation. Julia attached to this email is a file containing complete instructions on how to activate the security software. There is a 2-word password needed to access the file and the security system. I'm going to let you figure out what those 2 words are, but if you think back to the last time we saw each other at Spaga, it should be pretty easy. If you can't remember the 2 words, maybe Adam can help you out because he heard them. Of course, the passwords were broken. Promises those 2 words would always be needed to access the security system. I know I was being a bit juvenile, but so what she would be reminded of how she treated our marriage every time she accessed the system. I have installed the package on the server, and using the instructions, you only need to activate it and set second-level access codes and passwords for the various users. It is all in the instructions. If you have any issues in the future, call Greg, and he will put you in touch with the staff that worked with me on the program because I will not be working there any longer. Good luck. Sometimes the men who have divorced a cheating wife find a younger, more beautiful, sexier, smarter, and more intelligent woman than the one they divorced. She likes sex better and will love him forever and never cheat on him. That was Julia before she did cheat on our marriage. And then I didn't find that woman. In fact, when I resigned from Grace System Solutions, I went into a state of depression. Yes, I did continue to receive huge amounts of money from royalties for the security package licenses Greg continued to market. It was beyond my expectations, but the money didn't matter to me anymore. I was in territory that I had never been in before. I think my self-esteem was at the bottom. I had lost confidence in myself, I guess a first for me, since I had always been self-assured. I knew I had a problem, so ultimately I applied SAIL, and I started seeing a counselor, and after a few sessions I came around, I continued to see the counselor, and no, it wasn't Dr. Graham for a while longer, but I was pretty sure I was back on the right track. I dated occasionally, but never anything serious with the money flowing, and my life better. I decided to just go with the flow for a while before I ever fall in love again, dear listeners. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Something super special awaits once we hit that milestone. Subscribe now and join the fun.